Good evening, everyone. What a fantastic turnout. It was that extra hour of sleep, wasn't it? Absolutely thrilled that you could join us this Monday evening. My name is Fred Lee, and I am the Director of Alumni Engagement at Alumni UBC, also a very proud alumnus. It is absolutely my pleasure to welcome everyone to the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center and this evening's Mastermind Masterclass with none other than Canadian filmmaker Atom Egoyan. Before we begin, I would like to first acknowledge that we are gathered here on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people, on which we are about to enjoy tonight's wonderful festivities. Mastermind Masterclass is an alumni UBC speaker series which began in our centennial year, offering students and alumni an unprecedented look into the minds of modern masters, making a unique impact on the world and sharing with us the lessons that they've learned. We would like to sincerely acknowledge the estate of Kitty Heller for their generous contribution to making this very popular series a reality. As well, we want to recognize the Department of Theatre and Film at UBC for their partnership. Tonight's event is in celebration of the 50th anniversary of film classes at UBC. Yes. So it's only fitting that we invite the head of the Department of Theatre and Film to bring greetings on behalf of the department. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Stephen Heatley. Thanks, Stephen.
I'm going to ruin everything up here. On behalf of our department and my colleagues in theater and film, I am delighted to welcome you all here. I want to tell you a little bit about our department. I like to call us a full-service Department of Theatre and Film, and that is that we study both the practice and the scholarship of both theatre and film. This university started here not here, but in 1915, and in that very first year, a young English professor named Frederick Wood created the first production at UBC, and we have been putting on plays on this campus ever since. In the 1930s, Dorothy Somerset joined the Department of Continuing Education and was teaching summer classes, and someone came up with the idea that in 1952 that we should have a theater of our own on campus, and it was in 1952 that the first Frederick Wood Theater was created. That was on the corner of University Boulevard and West Mall. In 1963, the purpose-built purpose-built theater happened where it is currently now on Crescent Road. But prior to that, in 1958, the Department of Theatre was created, and we began to teach theater classes in the regular calendar. 1966, Joan Reinertson joined the faculty, and the very first film class was taught. So as Fred said, we're celebrating 50 years of film classes at UBC. It's just a year late, so it's actually 51 years. In 1966, the history of film was taught. The next year was the first film production class taught. Now we teach over 50 classes in film studies and film production. And in 2019, we're going to add a PhD in cinema and media studies to our roster of many degrees. I am delighted that our department was able to connect up with alumni engagement. I'm delighted to see you all here. I hope we'll see you in many other events that the Department of Theatre and Film is doing. In fact, this Thursday we're going to open a world premiere play in the Frederick Wood Theatre, Wives and Daughters by Jacqueline Firkins. So thank you very much for coming, and I know you're going to enjoy this evening.
Also want to just compliment you on your shoes. Because I don't know any other department head on this institution that would wear such fabulous red shoes. So thank you, Stephen Heatley. Only in the Department of Theater and Film. Everyone, please join me in congratulating and welcoming all of our friends, alumni, faculty, staff, and students from the Department of Theater and Film. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our presenting sponsor, Creative BC, for their incredibly generous support of tonight's Mastermind Masterclass event. We will hear from the CEO shortly. As well, we would also like to thank the Faculty of Arts for their contributions to tonight's festivities, Videomatica for providing one of Adam's films for the student Mastermind Masterclass session that was held earlier today in this room, and the Irving K. Barber Learning Center, our webcast partner, who is recording tonight's program, which will be made available on the Irving K. Barber digital library, as well as the Alumni UBC website. We are sold out, but with all of our programs, we endeavor to share our wonderful programming with our alumni locally, nationally, and internationally. In addition to the 50th anniversary of film classes, Alumni UBC is also marking a very special anniversary, our 100th birthday. We hope you'll enjoy this commemorative video that we have put together.
For the last century, from each of the places we called home, our paths converged at UBC. We worked hard, supported each other, and graduated with a sense of accomplishment. We were shaped by the knowledge and experiences we gained, and know they contributed to who we've become. As individuals, we are talented and unique, and as one, we're a powerful movement of difference makers. Knowing that we're stronger together, Alumni UBC was formed by UBC's first graduates on May 4th, 1917. Now, 100 years on, we're more than 325,000 strong, spanning over 140 countries. And when we bring our ideas, interests, and energy together, it's a beautiful thing. To mark our 100th year, we're building our community around the globe with an ambitious goal, making 100,000 connections. And there are many ways to take part. There's everything from joining one of our social media communities to attending or hosting one of 100 dinners in whatever part of the globe you live. You can also participate in an official Alumni UBC event, either in person or online, and visit the Robert H. Lee Alumni Center on our Vancouver campus, the home of UBC Alumni for Life. The first and easiest way for you to connect is to add yourself to our global alumni map at alumni.ubc.ca. It's quick and simple. So join us in celebrating this remarkable moment in our history by connecting with each other and UBC. And stay tuned for more to come.
Happy 100th birthday, Alumni UBC.
So as you saw in our video, May 4th marked the 100th birthday, and it is a tremendous milestone. So we're celebrating the power of our global community with an ambitious goal, making 100,000 alumni connections during our centennial year. We invite all of you to participate. You can find out all the many ways that you can be part of this incredible milestone year and celebration. Please visit us at alumni.ubc.ca. All right, let's get started. Normally at this part of the evening, we would encourage everyone to turn off your cell phones, but that is not the case. As we always love is for you to share with your social network the power of the Alumni UBC community. Up on the screens should be the various hashtags that you can share about tonight's events. You may want to get a photo with Adam later on the red carpet that we have assembled downstairs, and some celebratory champagne as we mark the 50th anniversary of film classes at UBC. It's at Alumni UBC. The hashtag is UBCMMMC, as well hashtag We Are One UBC, all one word. Also this evening, we once again going to be using our very cool audience engagement platform to engage all of you in the conversation. If any of you are carrying a mobile device, and we did this earlier this afternoon, it was very hard pressed to find any student without a mobile device. Here's your opportunity to engage in the conversation in real time. Our moderator will have a look at all the questions posed by all of you, and we will pose to Adam the most popular. So we invite you now to go to slido.com. And the URL and hashtag should be projected on the screen. Please enter UBC MMMC to sign in. This platform will allow you to ask questions and comment in real time throughout tonight's program. You can input questions by clicking on the Ask button. Other attendees can like your question by giving it a thumbs up to the right. And when we get to the Q&A portion or during the conversation, our moderator will pose those top questions to Adam. Again, all of the details are projected on the screen. Following the program, we will invite everyone to a complimentary reception, as mentioned downstairs, where we will continue the conversation. And Adam has kindly agreed to join us on the red carpet. But without further ado, now it is my pleasure to introduce a great friend, Prem Gill, CEO from Creative BC, who is, as our presenting sponsor, will have the honor of introducing tonight's moderator. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Prem Gill.
I know Fred's all grown up. It's very sweet. Thank you, Fred, and congratulations to the program here on your 51st anniversary. That's hard to say at the end of a long day, but I have to say I'm so impressed by the amount of people who have come out to support this event tonight, and it just, as the organization that's responsible for supporting the development and support of the creative industries in British Columbia, I think this is great evidence that how vibrant we are, how many amazing people have come out of this program over the years, people like Adam and so many others that really have built the global reputation of us here in British Columbia as a real center for creativity and for filmmaking. But it is my great pleasure tonight to introduce you to Christine Evans. She is a lecturer here at UBC's Department of Theatre and Film, and she holds a PhD in film studies from the University of Kent in England and has numerous publications in her name. Her research focuses on the intersections between film theory, continental philosophy, and I should have asked you how to pronounce this correctly, but I'm going to say Lacanian psychoanalysis, and love, which is what my name means. So yes, you study Prem. So please welcome your moderator for tonight, Christine Evans.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Prem, for that introduction. I'm so honored to be here this evening to moderate this conversation with the Canadian filmmaker Atom Egoyan. I've been a huge fan of Adam's work from the first time I saw one of his films, 1994's Exotica, a film which my parents strictly forbade me from seeing since I was 13 at the time, but which I saw anyway and loved. In high school, when every other girl I knew had a picture of Leonardo DiCaprio in Titanic taped up in their locker, I had a big photo of Atom Egoyan. I still agree with me, it was the right choice. If you told high school me that one day, after writing on his films and teaching them in my classes, I'd be moderating an event with Atom Egoyan, my head would have exploded. I would have been so disbelieving. Today, Adam's output continues to fascinate me as much as it did then. There's something about his films that ensnares and beguiles us. They can be cold and alienating at the same time that they're achingly human, always encouraging empathy, even when meaning, understanding, and truth elude us. Before I introduce him to the stage, I want to let you know what the rest of the program briefly is going to look like. Adam will be giving a presentation for about 30 minutes. Following this, I will join Adam on stage and start with a few questions of my own before asking for your questions from the audience engagement platform, which Fred has already talked to you about. Now, I would like to give you a brief introduction of our special guest, Atom Egoyan. So in his films, Atom Egoyan, an Egyptian-born Armenian Canadian, often refers to common themes of intimacy, displacement, and the impact of technology and media on everyday life. His ability to understand and inspire teams of highly talented people is critical to tackling these subjects and to producing his unique vision. Egoyan's keen ability to blend insightful stories that don't fear being complicated with universal human themes has resulted in a daring body of work, popular with critics and audiences alike. Egoyan has collected prestigious awards from Cannes and the Toronto International Film Festival. He has acted as president of the jury at the Berlin Film Festival. He was knighted by the French government, and he received Canada's top civilian honor, the Order of Canada. And that is just to name a few. He is here with us tonight to give us a talk entitled The Melodic Curve of Drama. So please join me in welcoming to the stage Atom Egoyan.
I don't know. Thank you. Thanks. I don't know how anyone lives up to being a pinup in a... I have never heard that, actually, so I can assure you it was the last thing I would have ever thought I'd be introduced by. But anyhow, I was listening to an interview with Camille Paglia on the CBC a few months ago. As I heard this prominent and provocative feminist speak about her interpretation of the state of workplace attitudes towards sexual harassment and abuse, I found myself becoming increasingly outraged. It wasn't only what Camille Paglia was saying, that current standards of behavior were paternalistic and hand-holding, that women should be prepared to defend themselves without such a clear code of conduct. It was the fact that she was talking about herself. What made her position so troubling was not only that it called into question decades of hard-won battles over controlling sexual harassment on campuses and in professional settings, but that the reason for her calling for the dismantlement of this ideology was that, in the end, she didn't need it. As a young undergraduate, she would have known how to behave, how to protect herself, how to do things right. Ask anyone to talk about their attitudes to any given situation, and they can't help but locate themselves within the question. It's at the essence of any conversation. And while it's great for creating a sense of personal mythology, how Camille Paglia's Italian immigrant family taught her a thing or two about standing up for her rights, it does little to form a rule book for how the great majority of us are meant to behave. One of her points seemed to be that a young female attending university should be able to set her own set of codes and fight to establish her own sense of self-worth based on her ability to fend off possible aggressors and bullies. According to Paglia, this was how respect was earned, not by a collective set of rules. Needless to say, this interview was conducted a few weeks before the revelations about Harvey Weinstein and the raft of other allegations against so many other men in power, which have since come to light. I'm bringing up my anger over listening to this interview I heard with Camille Paglia a few months ago because I've been asked to speak about my journey as a director today. And I'm very aware that in being asked to respond, I can only frame a response based on a very particular experience. While I don't think anything I might impart is as reckless as Paglia's advice, I urge you all to situate my experiences in a very specific context. The way I came to be where I am today is formed by a very unique blend of circumstances. In short, take from it what you will. Unlike the advice from Camille Paglia, no one might get hurt from what I'm about to tell you. As an aside, I looked up the Paglia interview on the CBC site where it has the heading, "Modern Feminism Needs to Stop Blaming Men." After the news that broke out just after this interview was aired, I have to wonder who else but men are we to blame for these egregious abuses of power. In many ways, my journey started right here in Vancouver. We arrived to the city from Egypt 55 years ago. My parents had met at art school in Cairo and started a gallery that morphed into a modern design store. When they moved to Canada, they decided to head west. My father had a teaching degree and knew English well enough that he was offered a school job in Williams Lake. At that point, our family's fortune was changed by a meeting he had on Granville Street, just past the bridge near Broadway. There was a modern design store, some of you might remember, called Don Adams Furniture. and my father wandered in, sensing the affinity and taste, to the store he had in Cairo. Don Adams and my father started talking, and Don told my father that they had a sister store in Victoria. He was thinking of closing it down and wondered if my father might be interested in taking it over. And thus, I ended up being raised in Victoria. There are a few things I've been wondering a lot about lately. What if my family had stayed in Egypt? Would I be doing what I'm doing? Would I have survived the Arab Spring making indie films for the rather limited Middle Eastern art film market? The other big question is what my life would have been like if I'd grown up in the interior of BC. What would my life have been like without the Empress Hotel, teen crumpets, the Butchered Gardens, tally-ho rides, and the joys of being raised in the last bastion of the long-crumbling British Empire? A few weeks ago, I opened my new production of Leos Janáček's masterpiece, Yennefer, at Pacific Opera Company in my hometown. It was the first theatrical production I'd put on in Victoria since my presentation of a play I wrote and directed at Mount Doug High School. That was 40 years ago. The same year, I had submitted my first Super 8 movie to the BC Schools Film Festival. The response of the judges hadn't been very positive. It was rejected as being insufferably pretentious. Seriously, at the time, I was told by my high school teacher not to take this too seriously. He said that the mainland judges had an attitude because I was from Victoria. I believed him. Now, the Victoria I was raised in was a very different place from the bustling cosmopolitan metropolis it is now. The gleamingly sleek city, the frenetically fast-paced hub all BCers are proud to call their capital. We were the only Armenian family in the city, a status we might have also enjoyed had we moved to Williams Lake. On the other hand, there would have been no tea and crumpets, no tally-hos, no Butchered Gardens. When we moved to Victoria, I didn't know a word of English. I have a distinct memory of my first day of kindergarten at a school called Jiminy Crickets. My father told the teacher that if I said, yes, anotiem in Armenian, it meant I was hungry. If I said some other words, it meant I needed to go to the bathroom. Later that day, I told the teacher I needed to go to the bathroom and was given a sandwich. Two things became clear with that first traumatic exchange. First of all, I became sensitive to the possible absurdity of language. Words didn't necessarily mean what you thought they did, and things could be wildly misinterpreted. More significantly for what I was eventually to become, I was able to imagine this encounter, perhaps at the very moment it was unfolding, as a scene. I used to think this was perfectly normal, picturing myself objectively in a scene that I was actually experiencing, seeing myself in a sort of real-time movie. With time, I've come to see this process of immediate objectification as a strange quirk of my personality, this concurrent experience of speaking to you today and watching myself in some simultaneous replay, observing this moment as a constructed performance. Of course, this moment is a constructed performance. I've been invited here to deliver this talk. But my experience as a young immigrant made me begin to think, in the process of consciously restructuring myself as an Anglo kid in Victoria, that we are all possibly constructs, that our personalities are the results of the observed behaviors of those around us. This need to observe and possibly learn from the behavior of others has a lot to do with our fundamental fascination with drama. We can all understand and immediately grasp what it means to feel absolute joy or excruciating pain and misery. These emotions, which exist at the extreme ends of our personality, are absolutely accessible, the things that make us laugh and cry. This being understood, I began to think that a majority of the other feelings that we use to negotiate our lives are, in some way or another, entirely performed. Perhaps this is why so many people find it easy and even natural to learn a new language by watching foreign films and reading subtitles. There is a fluid correspondence between watching a screen performance and absorbing lines of dialogue. It isn't that our day-to-day lives should be seen as being fake or entirely artificial. That would be ridiculous and even sociopathic. What I'm suggesting, rather, is that there are a multitude of mannerisms we employ which allow us to get through the day. What Shakespeare was getting at when he said that all the world is a stage and we are all players. We strut and fret our hours upon the stage, and learn to do so not only from parents, family, friends, and teachers, but perhaps just as significantly in our image-soaked culture, by the way we observe celebrities and politicians and the plethora of major and minor characters in the film, television, webcasts, and YouTube videos that inundate our lives. It's a disturbing thought, but isn't it possible that before we say, "I love you," those very words are somehow filtered by every person we've ever watched express that sentiment on our screens and smartphones? It's not a question of this being a diminishment of our sensitivity. In fact, it might be a way in which it's become refined and even somehow more earnest in light of the society we're all members of. Our most intimate feelings have become way more communal in a profound sense than previous generations could have ever imagined. Everything has become shareable. In one generation, we've gone from a community that was all watching pretty much the same films and television shows, or at least hearing about the same shows and movies, to being overwhelmed by more content than we could ever imagine absorbing, even if we were to devote every moment of our waking lives to this Herculean task. Not only am I, as an industry professional, constantly surprised by someone telling me I need to watch a series I've never heard of, it's also being played on a channel or a streaming device that's just as much of a complete mystery to me. The way you access or download most of these shows has become as obscure as the characters and plots lurking somewhere in my system, begging for my attention. Not only are we overwhelmed by what we need to watch, we're just as bewildered by how we're going to watch it. What do we make of this overload? It's important to remind ourselves that we are attracted to watching drama for two primary reasons. The first is to expose us to great works of art. Most of these works, be they theater, film, or television, play games with reality. Some have the extraordinary ability to actually change our sense of reality. The great Greek tragedies and Shakespearean plays have done this, as well as the great dramatists like Goethe with his Faust, Molière with his Misanthrope, and even David Simon with The Wire. The reason I include The Wire is because it shares with these other classic works of literature and drama the ability to shift our understanding of reality by expanding the means we have of knowing ourselves. Over its 5 seasons, it showed us a new way of seeing things by viewing our society as a series of component strata layered on top of each other and functioning in a multi-dimensional way. It made us change our sense of reality. Like all great dramas, it made demands on us, and we either respond or accept or reject these demands, and in so doing, define ourselves. And for those of you who haven't seen The Wire, I just made your lives more complicated by adding yet another thing you have to watch. Drama of this standard confronts the ultimate in human experience so that we can seek to understand what humans are and how they create humanity. But in seeking to better understand humanity, we get to the second reason why we need drama. And by drama, I include thrillers, tragedy, comedy, history, pastoral, pastoral comical, historical pastoral. A famous Shakespearean character in Hamlet didn't mention action, horror, or various other subgenres, but we get the idea. For the purposes of this discussion, it's all drama. We are fascinated by drama because it shows us how we might act under similar circumstances. In the works that truly engage us, we are swept into a world where we can place ourselves in the same place and gauge our own reactions. Even though I'm not a fan of extreme horror or fantasy, each of these genres, in order to work for an audience, invites the viewer into a specific world where the actions seen by human beings on screen are somehow connected, though in very heightened ways, to the behaviors and mannerisms we use to perform our day-to-day tasks and functions. One part of our brain is being thrilled by what it would mean to be on the sinking Titanic or on the beaches of Dunkirk or in a town invaded by zombies or vampires, but in order for these films or series to work, it's the details of how they observe human behavior in ways in which we can intimately relate to that makes us feel most visible to ourselves and permits us to act that much better as persuasive characters on our own daily dramas. Now, I'm not suggesting that all this came to me in a flash the moment my kindergarten teacher gave me a peanut butter sandwich instead of guiding me to the bathroom, but it certainly helped point me in the direction of what I've ended up doing with my life. A more extreme example of this early childhood sense of displacement was presented to me in another CBC interview I heard a couple of months ago. It was the story of the journalist Pauline Dakin and how her childhood had made her a stranger to her own life. By the time she was 11, Dakin had attended 6 schools in 7 years because her family was always on the run. Her father had told the family that he'd been a kingpin in the Vancouver Mafia. Yes, the Vancouver Mafia, if the name Stan Dakin rings a bell to any of the more shadowy people out there. Not because of his crime connections, but because he'd been a United Church minister. The young Pauline was told by her father that he had counseled a prominent mafia figure from this very fair city, and that the mob was concerned that a lot of their secrets had been spilled to this man of the church. In response, the Vancouver crime gang was getting ready to take action against the Dakin family. In the book she has written about her upbringing, Dakin describes this terminal city mafia as not a single entity, but a many-tentacled octopus, a collection of interconnected yet sometimes opposing syndicates or organized crime groups, local, national, and international. It gets better. A dark, ill-defined, anti-organized crime group was described to Pauline that only answered to Canada's Privy Council. Not the RCMP, not CSIS, only the Privy Council. The ultra-secret government organization was behind the family's constant need to move so rapidly through this constantly shifting cloak and dagger scenario. In one circumstance, her mother, who completely believed Stan's story, got into the family car at a gas station and handed the young Pauline a note that said, "Don't talk, I'll explain. Take off your jewelry and put it in this envelope." The fear was that the girl's jewelry had been bugged. I won't go into further details. You'll have to read her recent book, Run, Hide, Repeat, a memoir of a fugitive childhood. But on the CBC interview, Dakin said that there was always this nagging feeling. Quote, "How could this be true? How could you have this other world, the weird world that nobody would know about?" The implications were so large, just overwhelming. It made my life seem irrelevant. She finally organized a sting and revealed her father's monumental lie. Her mother was horrified that Pauline no longer believed the story that Stan had concocted, a story she had convinced herself was true. In fact, her mother believed the story to her dying day. There are so many things that interested me about this story and why I bring it up today. First of all, Pauline was obviously bound to be a journalist. As she puts in her book, she often finds herself reflecting on her extraordinary upbringing and, in her words, wrestling its strange narrative into submission and meaning. How could you not use these experiences to fuel your ambitions to uncover the real story about the world around you? The other fact I find so compelling was what Pauline found about her father and why he needed to create this crazy false world. The explanation offered by one doctor was that he suffered a form of delusional disorder. Paranoia and grandiosity, in this case having unique secret intelligence, were two characteristics of this condition. Which made me think, how much of my own need to make up these crazy stories and then organize a bunch of financiers and actors and crew to join me in making them is a result of my own sense of grandiosity? In fact, maybe I've just conned you all to come to this hall and listen to me. What if all filmmakers and artists have a mild and sometimes not so mild form of this delusional disorder? What if we need to have it in order to do what we do? As a director, I'm concerned with the placement of animate and inanimate objects in order to achieve the maximum emotional effect. When I'm working on a stage, the point of view is usually fixed. In all my years of working in theater, I've never staged anything in the round. That is to say, I've never placed the action in the center of a space and had the audience positioned around the action. The closest I've come to this particular configuration is in some of my art installations. But if I was to be honest, my particular craft is best understood, at least to myself, when it is presented in front of a fixed point of view. That may be a proscenium stage or a film camera. And when I presented work in a gallery space, there's always a place I prefer the viewer to be. This is often referred to as a sweet spot, the place in a theater where the visual lines and the sound are at their most powerful and potent configuration, where everything seems to be harnessed just right, where everything comes together. It is in the sweet spot where, in Pauline Dakin's words, I can best wrestle my strange narratives into submission and meaning. Of course, my sweet spot may not be your sweet spot. You may hate sitting at the front of a screen in a theater. You may have no problem with someone beside you eating popcorn or texting to a friend. You might be the person who would dread sitting next to someone like me when you go to watch a movie. To be honest, I would hate to be sitting next to someone like me. But there's no question that in my ideal presentation of any work I do, there's a relationship between the stage or film image and the profound tension of a group of strangers witnessing the dramatic action for the first time. And as important as seeing my actors' performances on a screen, there's also the choice of locations. I think about this a lot, where my characters have chosen to live, how they decorate their homes and tend their gardens. Often these locations are places where my characters get caught between the desire to cling to something from their past and the desire to escape it for something more promising. All these decisions that we see on the screen, where and how my characters are living, what they're choosing to wear, how I'm deciding to frame this all and make it sound, are part of my responsibilities as a director. I expect that my viewers will be attentive, and I used to believe that they would be most attentive in a cinema, that dark room where images are projected, the black space that holds all the complexities of Plato's cave, a place where shadows and light are filtered against the profound alchemy of a collected audience, no matter how big or small. But I'm aware that my dream of a cinema is becoming tinier and even obsolete, and that no amount of mourning, in Susan Sontag's famous words, will revive the vanished rituals, erotic, ruminative, of a darkened theater. But a month ago, I was in a darkened theater in the city I was raised in. I was working at the Royal, a grand old space that I went to as a child and first saw so many of the dramas and films that made me dream of becoming what I am today. And as I was doing research on the composer who brought me back to my hometown, Leos Janáček, I came across this lovely quote that I'll use to finish this part of the talk. Quote, "The art of dramatic writing is to compose a melodic curve, which will, as if by magic, reveal immediately a human being in one definite phase of their existence." These last couple of months back on the West Coast have definitely reminded me of a huge phase of my existence. And I'll conclude this with a thought. My parents came to this country with aspirations of making a name for themselves as artists. While I was in Victoria, I received an email, purely by chance, from someone in California saying that they had found one of my dad's old paintings, made while he was studying in the States some 65 years ago. The stranger now wanted to see if I would like to have this painting returned. I showed the email to my father, now almost 85, and he barely remembered the painting and definitely didn't remember the woman in the portrait. With this painting, he had certainly revealed this human being in a phase of her existence, and all that remained was this forgotten portrait. Who was this person? The stranger who sent me the email and who found the painting also wanted to know the story before he sent the artwork back. He'd been living with it for a few years and was really beguiled by who this person might have been. Since my father couldn't remember, I was faced with a choice. I could either tell him the truth, or I could embellish it. No one would ever know. What could be the harm? I could do what I've come to do with most of my life, spin a narrative reconstruction of who this person might have been. I could have created a drama. And to be honest, the only reason I didn't end up taking this route was because I got to finally work this strange little episode into the end of this very speech I'm giving here today. This is the construct. This is the thing I've now made her for life. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adam, for that fascinating presentation. Such interesting comments about the performative aspects of life, looking at them not as cynical manipulations, but as an amplification of existence. That's really interesting. So well, you're already sitting, so I was going to invite you to sit, but you're there already. So if you...
Okay.
I just have a few questions for you already. After that, I will take some questions from the audience. Sure. I'm now awkwardly going to get into this chair in front of all of you people.
Now, how big was your locker? Like, because that I want to know where the picture.
I had to fold the little newspaper page. I was looking for a photo. I tried to find a photograph of myself standing near my locker at that time.
That
and I just
would've been
couldn't
so
find
great.
one.
Okay.
So you just have to believe me. This
Okay,
is not
well,
an
okay.
embellishment for the purposes of drama. It really was true. You brought up, the episode with the sandwich obviously should hopefully spark some thoughts in people's mind with this question at least. Some people may not know that you and Ian Balfour in 2004 edited a book called Subtitles on the Foreignness of Film. And obviously the notion of foreignness is a very key thematic strand that runs through many of your films. So with that episode of the sandwich in mind, can you perhaps talk a bit about your attraction to this idea, to foreignness generally, and perhaps even more specifically to subtitles?
Well, it's interesting when you mentioned Exotica, and I really felt when people asked me, like, why was that film called Exotica? There was obviously the club itself, which is sort of like a kind of a locus, sort of a heterotopia, I suppose, of all these different experiences that are held in the film. But ultimately, what's most exotic sometimes is our own relationship to experience. What experiences and things that have happened to us mean, and how we filter them, how we understand them, and that is sometimes inaccessible, especially if someone has been traumatized in some way. That things are jigged and rejigged in a certain way that makes it exotic, outside, different. I think that's just something that's come up in a lot of the films, even the films where I'm dealing with, like let's say The Sweet Hereafter is a community of people in the interior of BC. There's not really an exotic element, but definitely there's an exoticism in terms of how these people experience certain things that have happened to them. And that's just something that has fascinated me as an idea. And foreignness, that we can be, our own experience can be foreign to us, or we can act in ways that are foreign to us. And that we have to understand or try to grapple with why that is. It's something that I'm fascinated by when I'm talking to actors, in terms of even sometimes the most seemingly simple scenes, that there's something else, there's another current that's going on. And there's something that's being negotiated which they may not be aware of, and yet which drives their action. So I think that, and the rituals that we make of our lives, the things that we ritualize, and by that I mean that we sort of form a pattern of behavior. Again, those are protective measures. Sometimes they're because we think we're helping ourselves, but we're actually sometimes just exacerbating some issue or some problem. It's difficult to talk about, but I'm fascinated by, very often in movies and TV, the meeting of strangers is very immediate and feels very natural, but I always think that it's way more barbed, and it's difficult to make contact with another human being. It's not something that people find, and especially I think as a new person into a culture, it's so improbable that you're going to actually make connection, and when you do, there's something genuinely miraculous about that.
That's interesting. And again, your talk and all of that discussion about, again, these performative aspects, these habits that we form in our lives. Again, it was interesting that you focused not on the potentially cynical aspects of that performativity, but the words you used, refinement, expansion, these are...
the reason I mentioned the Camille Paglia interview is because it really, I found myself really angered by it, because, and it wasn't, and again, it was before this whole thing happened with Harvey Weinstein and this whole battery of accusations, but it just felt that, she had a very clear sense of what her identity was and how she would have behaved. And she made the presumption of thinking that that's how other people should act. And I think that it's interesting because one of the, when you're raised in a Christian sort of idea, one of the basic ideas is that, treat others as you would treat yourself. But in fact, there are many people in the world that don't want to be treated the way you would treat yourself. And there's actually something very arrogant about thinking that, the way I want to be treated is the way, that I should extend myself. And that's not the case. That in fact, you have to negotiate that there are many people that don't want to be treated the way you would want to be treated in a situation. And that the real challenge in our society is to absorb that and to embrace it and to understand that that is, to understand how to create a diversified community is to actually fundamentally come to terms with that. And it's difficult, especially when you have statements like that or interviews like that, which just demean, I think, what people's experience might actually be.
Yeah, no, definitely. And absolutely that sense of, mistaking the universal for the particular and vice versa, right?
And yet, as I said, one can't, it's our instinct. You can't help but situate yourself and your experiences. So very often, I think in drama and the stories that I'm interested in, it's like people having to reconfigure and renegotiate their sense of what their reality might be. And the viewer has to do that as well. The viewer has to reposition themselves as well and has to work hard to absorb it. And sometimes it's challenging, but I find that that's, and one of the things I love about theater, live theater, is that an audience going to the live theater take that as a given, that what they're seeing is a construction. Those are not real people on the stage. It's clearly props, it's clearly, it's all made up. But if I do the work and I project myself into it and I embrace it, I can go a tremendous distance, and that can be really moving. And film and television very often, it just gives you reality, and you don't have to make that same effort. But as a result, you're not taken into the story in the same way. And very often I try and create a structure that might almost present a narrative in a theatrical manner. Yeah, I like that type of storytelling. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too because, I think it's now become way more common in TV series. When I was growing up, TV was really pretty simple-minded, right? But it's become so sophisticated, and you get like The Affair, or you get these series that are dealing with these alternate sort of ways of understanding and positioning truth, and it's a mosaic form of storytelling, and it's become embraced.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And speaking of sort of the way that you tell stories, I wanted to ask a question about your attraction to adaptations. So many of your films are adaptations of other works, so you know this already, but just for everyone else's information, The Sweet Hereafter is adapted from Russell Banks's novel, Felicia's Journey, for example, from William Trevor's novel, Devil's Knot from Mara Leverett's book on the famous court case about the West Memphis Three, and Chloe, a remake of Anne Fontaine's film, Natalie. So what is it that draws you to adaptations, and what particular challenges might they present?
Other worlds, again, like worlds that I wouldn't have access to. The world that Russell Banks presents is a world that I wasn't raised in. I wouldn't have that sense of access to those people. Or William Trevor, a great writer, I don't know that, what it would have meant to have been a young woman being raised in that town, and what it would have meant to have made that journey. I don't know the American South, and Leverett's book made that available to me. And those are just, they're collaborations. I'm working on one now, which is, again, a Galen Yan, Chinese writer, and it's her book on the formation of Chinatown in San Francisco in the 1870s, and that's, again, a world I wouldn't have access to. It's a world hasn't been presented before, so it's exciting because it's new territory. I do think that there have been 10 features that I've written and directed, and were based on my stories, but I feel like there's a whole other world out there, and why not explore that? Why not venture into that? And we were talking about this before. Sometimes you may not be the best person to do that. You might think you are, but you look at the finished thing and you go, well, maybe someone else would have had a different take on it. But if the opportunity presents itself, it's sometimes so, it's exciting to go to a place that is outside of your comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. And is that sort of, would you name that as sort of the primary challenge in working with adaptations, is that you are taking other people's voices or experiences or that sense of authenticity and translating it through the own lens or filter that you put on
Yeah,
it?
it's an interesting thing, and there's also that scary moment when you've written an adaptation and you present it back to the writer, and they might they might be really challenged. I mean, Sweet Hereafter, I would say Russell Banks was really didn't know what to make of the draft, didn't know what to make of the inclusion of the Pied Piper of Hamlet. Found it was like way too precious a literary device, and just felt that it was. And the whole treatment of Nicole, the female character, is wildly different than it is in the book. But ultimately, he embraced the finished film. That's one of the huge differences is when you're working in film, you know, even with your closest collaborators, they may not really get a sense of what the whole thing is going to feel like. You have it in your head and of how it's going to all work or how you hope it might work. If you shoot it a certain way and with a certain tone to the performances and the way the music is going to work, you can share that, but no one really understands it until they see the finished form. When you're working in opera, even if these ideas are extreme, like I did a production of Così fan tutte with Mozart, and I literally made it as a school for lovers, which is what it's also called, School for Lovers, or Wagner's Die Walküre. I did this other, you know, it doesn't matter, I won't go into the details, but the thing is when you're working with live theater, everyone sees what's there. Like there's no mystery around it. Like this is what the set will look like. The music is not going to change. So all your collaborators are in on the overall effect and get a sense of if it's working or not, because it's all there. It's not lonely. The theatrical process is not a lonely one. It's a communal one. The film process involves a lot of people, but it's ultimately very lonely because you're the only person who sees what it might be. And it's difficult to get other people to understand that. They pretend to understand it, but they don't really get it until they see the finished thing. And they may be surprised by either how well it works or how it doesn't work. Or, you know, it's a different type of responsibility. And so when you're dealing, you know, I don't know what Mozart or Richard Wagner or Leos Janáček would have thought of these interpretations, but I am dealing with writers who are living. William Trevor's now passed away, but you know they are very involved. And I remember when I did Felicia's Journey, and I said to the producer, I want to show it to William Trevor, and I want to get his response. And he was saying, well, you don't need to. I mean, we have the rights. You can do whatever. But I felt that I needed to have his input. Which is, again, frustrating because you ask for that, but then when they respond, because it's not their world, you know, you then become defensive. So it's interesting, like, why do we do that? I mean, it's almost as though you want approval of something that you know you can't really, you know, get until you show them the finished work, you know. I remember with Felicia's Journey, which a film I'm really proud of, and I think Bob Hoskins is amazing in it. But I mean, I just done The Sweet Hereafter, and William Trevor said, well, why don't you use Ian Holm? I mean, he's obvious. He's such a great actor, and couldn't understand the Bob Hoskins choice until he saw it. So, as I say, it's you have to imagine and hope that something is going to become the best form of what it can be in your own mind.
Well, that's interesting. That's an interesting way of putting it. And I do want to ask about Yanafa, just because it's your most recent project. So, again, for people who may not know, you did just finish directing a production of Janáček's Yanafa for the Pacific Opera Victoria. Again, you've worked on operas before, some of which you've mentioned, also COC's Salome.
The Salome was...
You co-wrote a chamber opera?
Yes, which was done here at Vancouver New Music with Rodney Sharman, local composer, and that sort of... the Salome came here as well. It was a Vancouver opera after COC. Those are all thrilling. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because I used to come to Vancouver to see the big shows, right? Like Led Zeppelin and Santana and Clapton. They went to the PNE. I have a really funny story with the Led Zeppelin because I was like 13, 14, and my parents would not allow me to come over by myself. And then I realized that there were these friends of my parents who had 2 sons who were Zeppelin fans, and they were older than me. I said, well, what if I go with them? I won't say their names because of the way the story goes. So they said, well, if they're going to take you, sure. And so I went and begged these 2 older, boys if I could come with them, and they were like, they scoffed, and then they looked at each other, and I could see something kind of connected, and they went, oh yeah, no, we'd love to have you. And as it turned out, these guys were like kind of serving Vancouver Island with most of its marijuana at the time, and they basically saw me as like a drug mule. And so I came to this concert. They took me to some seedy hotel somewhere near the PNE, stripped me down, kind of like gaffer taped me with all this dope, put a ski jacket over me, and literally pushed me through the turnstile of the PNE and left me on my own. Literally, after I got through the turnstile, they took me to a washroom, like took away all the drugs, sold it throughout, and I was left alone. It was like one of those things again when I got back, and my parents were like, so like, you see, wasn't it a good idea to go with them? And I was going, yeah, it was a great idea to go. if you only knew,
But the pure Zepp experience.
Yeah, the pure Zepp experience. Anyway, that's a bit of an aside. So anyway, but to come back and to do these shows at the Queenie or wherever have been like really great. And like the Royal, it's interesting. That was a really good experience, like doing this show. And it was, I also think that it was amazing to be back in the city for 4 weeks, and then you sort of see all these people that you went to high school with in the street, and you hadn't seen them for so long, and it's kind of an amazing thing to bubble up as you're presenting an opera about infanticide and horrors, and it was kind of it's a beautiful piece though. Mm-hmm. I love this. It was one of the first times one of the reasons I did it was because most of the time when you're doing opera, you're asked, you're presented with the idea, can you direct Salome or De Valkyrie or Così fan tutte? And in this case, I said to Timothy Vernon, director of Pacific Opera, I'd love to do the Janacek, and we both agreed and decided on this, and it was a really good experience.
But you've done so many operas. As a filmmaker, what is it about opera?
Oh, it's because I love music and drama. I love. There's a lot of music in my films, and the music is always the last thing you put onto a film. Mm. And really, until you put the music on in that final mix, you don't really have the film. But it's so great with opera. You start with that. You're not going to change the music. The score is there. So you're basically, you're dramatizing it, all the gestures and everything you're doing is a response to the music. And that's just thrilling. Mm-hmm. And especially when it's, all these operas are great composers. And, so yeah, we all know the Ride of the Valkyries, but to stage it is really exciting. Mm-hmm. And to detail it and to do something different with it, or, and I think one of the things that's important with all these choices is that the composers are all composers who loved drama. Like Richard Strauss saw Oscar Wilde's Salome and thought, I want to make that into an opera. Janacek saw Gabrielle Prasova's play, Her Stepdaughter, actually one of the first libretto written by a woman, and said, I want to make that into an opera. Lorenzo del Ponte's libretti for Mozart are just wonderful dramas, and Wagner is a sort of a case unto himself, right? But he just wrote this stuff, and so they're all dramatists. They're people who are really invested in the idea of telling these stories and finding a way of making them urgent and compelling. And I think sometimes it's interesting that, we all know Oscar Wilde. He's one of the most famous dramatists in the English language, and yet his play Salome is very rarely done because it doesn't really work as a drama, but it works wonderfully as a libretto for Strauss. We don't know, no one presents Gabrielle Prasova's Her Stepdaughter, but it works as a wonderful libretti for Janacek's opera. So, these are very creative minds that are able to see the potential and how their music can lift it to another place. And very often when I'm working with my film composer, it's also so what do they have to say, or how do they respond to the storytelling that they're presented with? Mm-hmm. It's exciting. It really is. I really respect filmmakers who don't use music. I think there's a great tradition of that. And I always promised myself one day I'll make a film. Well, I did. I actually did a film version of Crap's Last Tape by Samuel Beckett, which has no music at all. You couldn't put music to that text. It's just like so, you know, you wouldn't be allowed to actually, but thankfully. But, and that's about an hour of cinema without music. That's the closest I'll ever come, because I really love what you can do with music and how it can lift a scene and change a scene. Today I was listening to some music on the way over on the plane, and I was just going, oh yeah, I'll think about that piece by Benjamin Britten for the Chinatown project, you know, because I don't want to use like Chinese music. I want to use something that's between, and so I'm always thinking about musical ideas.
Mm-hmm. And what about like the visual dimension? You know, people often describe films as being operatic. Like again, as a filmmaker, is there something about that look of opera, or does it have some sort of aesthetic that you're attracted to? Because again, there have been so many operas.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think my visual sense serves what I do, but my main signature is the structure and the use of music and structure. You know, I'm not like this amazing, like as a director, there are directors who are just pure visualists, and that's what they do. I think I was raised by visual artists, and so I have a sense of like visual composition and color, but I'm not like an extravagant visual artist. And I'm not saying that, you know, in any false modesty. I see directors who are really adept at that and might have an operatic sort of view. I don't think my visuals extend to that. I'm probably just a bit more discreet than some, you know, I look at like famously Bertolucci and his collaboration with Vittorio Storaro. And those are operatic gestures. If you look at The Conformist, and you know the way the camera's moving, and you know the wind is blowing and the smoke is going and the light is kind of like, those are operatic sort of cinematic images. And I've used a few, but very, you know, with great caution. It's just not my it's not what's the expression in my toolbox.
Okay, well, I mean, that's sort of wraps it up for my questions, but we have many questions that you guys have
I
submitted.
love this device.
It
It's
is
incredible.
This is amazing.
Like, it's the first time I've ever actually used it. This is a device where, yeah, basically it's saying what are the most popular questions, and I've never. It's cool.
It's our democratic question asking device.
Yeah.
And we have, you've asked many questions and you voted on the most popular ones. So for those without a phone, in a few moments, I will be seeking questions the old-fashioned way, and there are some volunteers with mics running around. I can see one of them at least, to take a couple of your questions. But we'll start with these, so if you're okay,
Sure.
we'll start with. So we have a question here right away into the Canadian cinema question. Have you ever felt restrained with some of the limitations of Canadian cinema? Asks Anonymous.
No, because I think that, you know, it's been an incredible place to make these films, and then you take them to the world, right? I mean, where you feel restrained sometimes is like the incredible difficulty in getting Canadians to watch their own cinema. And the acceptance of their own cinema, but then you realize that other countries in the world have no problem with that at all. And I understand, like, there is an issue. We are, you know, in English Canada, we're really just so inundated with American product, and so it's difficult to compete with that. While in other places in the world, like, it's seen as being a distinct culture and quite different. But I wouldn't have had the career I've had anywhere else. And even when I was talking, you know, earlier this afternoon to the students, like when I made American films, I mean, I understand what the limitations are. Like those films are tested, right? There's audience test screenings and things that you want to do, you're not allowed to do because, you know, they don't test well. Those ideas don't test well. And the films that I've had, I mean, The Sweet Hereafter is a great example. That's an American novel. It was optioned by an American studio. And when I first read it and wanted to do it, I couldn't because it was held by an American studio. And when I finally got to meet Russell Banks, because of Margaret Atwood, who I met at a party and told her about this, and she said, "Well, just call him. Here's his number." And I went to meet him, and it was just great timing because the studio option was going to be renewed, and he said, "I don't think they're ever going to make the film." And I promised him that I could make it with our system at a much smaller budget, but it could get made. And it was just such a vindication to make the film in the Canadian system, and then re-enter it into the U.S. And then it kind of went the distance, right, with Academy Award nominations and all these amazing reviews. But the film could not have been made in the States. It was also kind of interesting because at the time, BC was the only province that allowed a lawyer to actually work on a contingency basis. So that was another reason I could set it specifically in BC, and it made sense that the American kind of apparatus that was used legally actually applied to this province. At the time, Ontario didn't allow that. So it was, I've always felt that it's been a blessing. I also think, I was saying this earlier today, if you are dreaming of a certain type of commercial audience, if you are thinking big and you are expecting that is the type of audience and the type of story you want to tell, then you are James Cameron. He was racing Kapuskasing. He left Canada when he was 17 because he realized that that's where he had to go. That's where Norman Jewison felt he had to go. Arthur Hillert felt they had to go. Denis Villeneuve now, is making wonderful films in that system, as is Jean-Marc Vallée. But I do think that the films I made are very, and even Chloe, when I got the script, was set in San Francisco. And I went to scout it in San Francisco, and it just seemed like a cliche. I've seen so many films made in San Francisco, and it was very difficult to kind of get a different, angle on it. And so I convinced them to bring it up to Toronto and to set it in Toronto. And it was the first American film that used Toronto as Toronto. Before Scott Pilgrim, I think, was the second one, right? So, it's just, no, I've never felt that. I just have felt that sometimes, it's difficult. This city is really difficult to crack, in particular Vancouver, for Canadian films. Everyone goes to see them during the festival, but it's difficult to get people to go and see Canadian films, in the rest of the year here.
And how? Question here about actors. When giving directions to your actors, how do you communicate what you're after? Do you have a style that you're known for amongst actors? How do you collaborate with them?
Well, the collaboration starts with the first conversation that you have when you're talking about the project. And really, it's just, you're invested in that character. You have to be really invested in what they're about to go through, and just be very attentive. Many directors are scared of actors, and they're not quite sure what to say to actors. And if you just realize when you're on a set that there's nobody who's really attending to that performance but you. Everyone else on that set has their own concerns with lighting and sound and props, and and there are directors who don't understand that they have to be right after every take, they have to be there with the actor. They have to, and everything has to be focused on the actor. And the actors, I think, know that I'm going to be focused on them. I think many directors, especially now, are looking at a monitor. They're with the other people. They're not really doing their job. I'm right beside the camera, which flips a lot of younger actors out because they're not used to that. They're used to directors being behind a monitor, but I'm right beside the lens. As a matter of fact, I was just shooting something the other day, and it was a young actress, and she said, "You're not going to be there, are you?" And I was like going, "Yeah, this is where I usually am," and I realized that it actually made her really uncomfortable. So maybe that's going to change, but for the most part, I'm trying to be as close as I can because first of all, it's a thrill. I get to be that close to these amazing performers, like sometimes just a few feet away, and that's just such a privilege. So, but I think it's just to be curious. Now, that being said, there are actors who don't want that level of intimacy, or find it, threatening, or they don't want to rehearse. They just want to do what they do. But often, what they do you've seen those mannerisms before, and if you can find a way to say to an actor, that's something I've seen you do before, and I don't want that. I want this, and they'll be surprised because that's the best example is with Felicia's Journey, where Bob Hoskins has a certain persona that he brings, and I didn't want that persona. I didn't want the Cockney guy. I wanted this guy from Birmingham, who had this nasal accent and who was so you can't, unless you're from England, you don't know how ugly that accent is to most people there. Like, it's not glamorous at all. There's nothing about it that's remotely interesting to most English people. And so it's for him to learn to do a Brummie accent and to not use his normal, set of tools was very scary. But I just, you have to be supportive at all times. You have to, yeah, they have to trust you. And hopefully they have reason to trust you, hopefully you're able to bring them to a place. Sometimes you can't. Sometimes they're, sometimes, again, you may not be the best director for them. I had a funny experience when I did Where the Truth Lies, where I was in a trailer with Kevin Bacon and this young actress, Alison Lohman, and I was there and I was talking to him, and at one point he just looked at me and it's kind of like, and he said, I don't like talking a lot about stuff. And I just kind of like went out of the trailer with my tail between my legs, and I remember Alison Lohman came up to me and said, I like talking. But it was like, so sometimes you just, you may not be the right person to get, and I think he gives a brilliant performance, but he just didn't want to talk about it very much.
Well, at least that's to type for Kevin Bacon. My impression has not changed. We should maybe take a question from the audience. So if anyone who is
Kevin
not
Bacon's
using
mother or
yes,
father.
Yeah. Sorry,
6
Mrs.
degrees
Bacon.
of,
There's someone over here. There'll be a microphone coming.
Yes.
There you go.
Did you bring any clips?
I brought all my DVDs, but I don't know how we would, there's nothing, if anyone has a particular scene, I actually have, but it's going to take a while to set it up. I didn't do it that way. But I do have, I didn't know what the format was.
Are you willing to bring up a clip and talk about it? It doesn't matter to me which clip, would be interested in hearing what the
Can we do that?
director-
I don't know if we have the time.
We
for
probably
that.
don't
It
have
might
the
be a
time.
little bit hard.
Visual Resource Center.
Yeah. I was going to, show you, but, if there's anything in particular, any particular scene, I know it's not, I could imitate, if you want me to imitate Liam Neeson or Colin Firth in any of the, I could do,
That one-man production of Exotica.
Yes, that one.
I'm going to go back briefly to the little platform here. Ava and David, UBC actors, so speaking of actors, asked this question. You talked about what makes a great drama. What do you think makes a great storyteller?
Empathy. It's always empathy. Like empathy. Like, you just need to have empathy. To tell a great story, you have to really feel for the people in it. I think that's the starting point. If you don't feel anything for your characters, if you're not excited about representing those human beings, then you don't really have any right to be telling that story. Sometimes you can look at the films of someone like Michael Haneke and go, well, he doesn't seem to have any empathy, but he does. He really, there are filmmakers that we think are very cold, but they do have real feeling for these people. And I think that in the best moments of the films I've made, there's sometimes empathy for someone that you wouldn't think that you would feel for, or sometimes it's unexpected.
Yes?
Hi, thanks so much for coming. It's been a great time so far.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm just wondering, you briefly touched on sort of this Canadian identity, and I'm just wondering if you could just expand a little more on Canadian identity in film and to what extent you as a storyteller have to do to add to that and disseminate the Canadian identity in film. Thank you.
Well, I think, look, we have such a strong identity as storytellers. We have great writers. We have great singers. I was talking about this the other day. We have amazing songwriters. So we obviously have stories to tell. It's just film is a medium that is costly, and it requires certain assurances from people that there's going to be some return on an investment. And that is a very difficult way to tell stories, right? If you have that responsibility, because songs need sincerity, and they're usually coming from a singular place. So you need to have the confidence to believe that what you're telling is truthful to you. And so And we are, in film, often, or have been overwhelmed by the presence of the American sort of behemoth, right? Like how do we compete with that in terms of our cinematic and television storytelling? But we've done a really good job. I mean, we now are, I think our television is like at a really high level. And if you look at the cream of our films, like they're really, really strong films. Now, the films will always be challenged because unless they have an American distribution deal, with the odd exception, I mean, like we did all go and see The Grand Seduction in English and French, and that was a success. And there have been, when I was growing up, in BC, I remember one of the big breakthroughs was a film like My American Cousin, Sandy Wilson's film, and I remember that was a film we all went to see, and it kind of broke out of that system. But for the most part, it's difficult for us to support, and if we're not supporting our films, it's difficult to justify the amount of, expense it takes. But we have a really rich history when you look at the best films and television we've made. It's really it's identifiable, but at a moment-to-moment basis, it seems very precarious all the time, because we are dealing with this incredible competition for our attention coming from the South. It's just the way it is. It always has been. That's just the nature of it. And I think that there are other factors to consider. I mean, you look at, I think other English-speaking countries, like I'm thinking of Australia, New Zealand, they love the way their particular language is spoken. They love hearing their particular vernacular. And as English Canadians, we don't really have a particular vernacular, though you could say that if you look at a show like Letterkenny or something like that, there is a vernacular, and that has been embraced in television. But it's, we just have to, look at it in terms of the bigger picture and how strong the culture is. We have a really strong cultural presence, but we don't really give ourselves enough, we ask these questions, like all the time, and that's part of who we are. Like it's just we are constantly, we ask like why we have it, like why is it that it's the opposite of manifest destiny in a way, which is kind of the American credo. It's not so manifest, right?
We only have time for one final question, which I'm going to take from, again, the democratic question generator. But don't worry, Adam will be joining us for the reception afterwards to continue the conversation with you. So if you do have questions, please feel free to ask him then. So this one last question, you spoke about the diminishing attendance in theaters and movie houses. So how do you see this perhaps affecting new generations of storytellers?
Well, I think I alluded to this. I mean, I think that we just have to accept that cinema, is not necessarily going to be the way most people see films. Like, it's just, and and we have to understand so that there's a certain language that probably has to be shifted. That films can't be as, to use Susan Sontag's word, as ruminative, as slow. That people's attention span is going to be, it's just tuned a different way. So, and that's just, sorry, I have to. I think, oh my God, I've just lost my voice. Really good timing, right? No, but I think that's, there's nothing that comes close to the experience of watching a film on a large screen. But one only has to go to a cinema now and to realize that people are really completely comfortable with texting or making noise, talking to each other during a screening. It's just it's that the sanctity of that sort of space has been completely and so one of the ideas of cinema is that it continues whether or not you're there. That you can leave a cinema, that film will still be projected and it'll still be ongoing, so that you are committed to staying in the cinema, so that you are bound to it. That's just not the case anymore. So I often have to, when I talk to students, I'm explaining what the long take meant. What does it mean to look at the beginning of or the end of Tarkovsky's The Sacrifice, or the beginning of Touch of Evil, or the first tracking shot in Weekend, or these very long takes, what that meant at a certain point. And it really is like a different language in a way. It's something that we need to understand, but it's not the rhythm of what we're feeling right now. And that's fine. Art forms evolve. Like no art form is static. And it's always the result of shifting conditions.
That's okay. Well, that's very interesting. And again, I'm sure that you have more questions that feel free to ask during the reception.
I have to say that when like the clips idea, it would take a long time to organize that, and ultimately everyone has different sort of films that they want to talk about. And the reality is that online, there are so many discussions. If you look at any of the films, and people are usually way smarter than I would be about talking about my films. Like there's some like Film Geek School. There's an essay on Exotica, and it made my jaw drop. Like the way that this film has been analyzed, and especially in relationship to the parrot imagery. This person is using medieval paintings of parrots and corresponding them to the parrots in my film. And I actually didn't want to respond to it because I thought it would make me look stupid. So, so that's it. So I could show you clips, but there are better people to talk about my clips. So thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Again, ladies and gentlemen, please join me on behalf of the Department of Theatre and Film and alumni UBC in thanking Christine and Adam for a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
And as in this afternoon session with the students, there was just some tremendous questions, again, over 40. And as promised to Adam, we will share all of those questions so that he can get a temperature of all of your thoughts in the room tonight. Clearly, a Canadian identity and Canadian filmmaking was certainly prevalent in all of, in most of your questions. Once again, tonight's event has been podcasted and videotaped, so to download as well as share tonight's conversation with your friends, colleagues here, there, and everywhere, please go to alumni.ubc.ca or the Irving K. Barber Digital Library. As well, while you're there, you'll be able to access many of the previous Mastermind Master Class conversations, as well other very interesting programming. Thank you again to Adam and to all of you for joining us this evening. We want to express our sincere thanks to Creative BC for their incredible support and continued success to all in this incredible industry and continue sharing the stories. To our friends at the Department of Theatre and Film, happy anniversary and much success to all of you. Clearly there is a future in storytelling, and whether you're in creative writing or theater and film, they all seem to collide and are part of an amazing family. And to all of you, Adam will be downstairs on the red carpet. So if you did have a question that you wish to pose, please join us in raising a glass to 50 years of film at UBC. Enjoy the rest of your evening.